Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. From Small Town Monsters. Yes, this is absolutely legendary to see you make your way into the Fox Den for this episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. We are going to be hunting the infamous Dogman, yet please allow me to feed. Thank you for releasing my shackles and letting me revamp myself. It is now time for the Midnight Society and Small Town Monsters to take a walk into the darkness.
Blow, cracks, shadows morph, fangs pierce, beasts reborn, fury rise, health ignites, burdens raise, endless nights.
When I looked into the eyes of this Dogman, there was nothing. This thing was an apex predator.
Milk road, cracks, shadows morph, fangs pierce, beasts reborn,
My creatures of the night, yes, welcome back once again to another episode of StarFox Radio and Midnight Lycanthropy. This is the home of the Midnight Society, and we once again sit down by the fire to burn the late night wood and figure out what is happening. Tonight, though, we have the Small Town Monster crew rolling in with us. Yes, two of my favorite people are here. And before we let them take the stand, we are going to be speaking about what is occurring with strange sounds down in the cave systems where people are going missing, and also sightings of dogmen and Sasquatch wearing what seems to be skulls. May I have my two excellent hosts introduce yourselves tonight?
For sure. My name is Aaron Deese. I'm an author and a content producer with the independent media company known as Small Town Monsters. I also host a podcast called Hey Strangeness, which sometimes gets updated. And I get the opportunity to work with my fellow guests very frequently, all the time, as a matter of fact.
Yes, my name is Heather Mosier. I am a producer and researcher at Small Town Monsters. And yeah, Aaron and I get to work together all the time. I think we're in contact multiple times every day.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, it's a very rare day that I'm not talking to Aaron at some point about
Yes,
who knows what. But
it is.
usually something along the range of Bigfoot or Dogman.
Yeah, I will think it's weird if Heather and I haven't. If it's been so many hours, I'm like, wait, is something wrong? Yeah. We talk about this stuff a lot. Yeah.
That's excellent, though. I mean, that's what makes a good team roll, and that's pretty much how I am with the majority of my really good friends and researchers too. Like I talked to Jody Cook and Jessica Jones and some other people pretty consistently myself. So, and I actually try to keep in touch with both of y'all as much as I can too. I mean, I know everyone's busy and such, but I always try to give you a holler and see what's new. So, have you been diving into any new Dogman stuff or werewolf stuff y'all's way, or?
Yeah, we have announced our 2020, what year is it? 2025 slate. Gosh, like we're talking about potential 2026 stuff too, so I have to check myself. But yeah, we just announced our 2025 film slate over at Small Town Monsters, and we are at long last tackling the Michigan Dogman. So, there's been quite a bit of stuff in the background involving getting ready for that production. That's occupied a lot of my attention here lately for me.
Yeah. Dawn of the Dogman. That's
Yes.
the route we're going.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great stuff right there. And to my audience, I mean, if you're watching my stuff, you have to know who Small Town Monsters is. And if you don't, well, what the Christmas trees, get over there and check out their stuff because if you like my creations, I mean, they literally amplify on a much larger scale and put out absolutely beautiful stuff. And I mean, yes, YouTube, Tubi, you check it out. I mean, they're there and everything they do is excellent. So definitely make sure to give them a sub and support what they're doing. And plus, they're here hanging out with us as well when they could be doing many other things.
Oh, we love this stuff, man. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to speak
Absolutely.
for Heather. Yeah.
You can speak for me. It's fine. You're right. You're right.
Great stuff, great stuff. Well, since I consider both of you legends and obviously friends, I do want to know both of your thoughts on what the heck is happening in the areas, obviously with the cave systems, missing people, national forest. Okay. And now
Mhm.
you have miners, present time. Obviously, mining's not as prevalent as it used to be, but very deep historical ones too, where yeah, a lot of these people are deceased and some is hearsay and again could be just one miner, etc. So no one's fully going to be able to, I guess, 100% verify this unless we're there ourselves or get a vocalization. But it is really interesting. These miners who are really
Mhm.
deep down in these cave systems and such are claiming to hear what sounds to be like Dogman or Bigfoot, like chatter activity. They've even seen what they claim to look like hairy hominoids or dog-like creatures down there. And I've thought for quite a long time they would use these cave systems to get around. And obviously, short-faced cave bears and cave hyenas and some of the other animals we spoke about before that I believe are still involved with this. Well, they all use caves as well. Okay, known animals do. So why would potentially something that isn't known to us or wants to stay undetected use these areas as well? And I wanted to hear both of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, man. I think that's a really interesting observation. Yeah. For a lot of the points that you make, like we know animals use cave systems. Our ancestors used caves as places to live because we didn't have buildings yet. And that's boiling it down to some very basic parts. But caves are natural defenses against the elements, against predators, against being discovered. So totally makes sense that you would see correlation with potential activity in these in areas where these things are being cited. Logically, that totally makes sense, but then you also you kind of get into involuntarily, it toes the line into the spiritual realm because our ancestors for centuries wrote about this world beneath us and things that come from the underworld. And you can interpret that as like a religious underworld. You can interpret that as like some hollow earth mythology if you want to, not to chase any of those threads too deeply. But this is an idea that shows up in a lot of storytelling and a lot of folklore and religious system. Like this whole idea of things coming from within the ground, from underneath it. So, you kind of have to look at it and go, okay, is it a supernatural thing, or is that the way that our ancestors were interpreting these creatures that may be living in caves? You know what I mean? Like, I kind of like to look at it from both angles, and I don't really know where I'm going with that, but that's what I thought of when you said that.
So I'm thinking a completely different route when this got brought up. And I think this is just because UFOs Revisited has been on my mind
Mm.
this evening in particular. But Aaron, do you recall? I think it was the battle at Dulce,
Oh
um,
yeah.
where the actually supposedly dug too deep and dug into an alien base camp. And then there was like an actual firefight that happened. But that makes me wonder because I do know we have all of these camps of what Bigfoot or Dogman, like what they are, right? Whether they're flesh and blood, whether they're spiritual, whether they're interdimensional. And then there are the people that are like, I think they're alien. So
Mhm.
we could go that route too, for a hypothesis if we really wanted to dive into all of the potential possibilities.
Yeah. Well, that takes us. I try not to do this, but that also kind of takes us Skinwalker Ranch, where you have stories of, it sounds like there's some kind of mechanical thing going on under the ground. And you also have stories of these large, apparently invincible wolves, and then it's interesting too, Kenny, that you mentioned they're miners, not just spelunkers or something like that. Because one thing Heather and I kind of noted as we were wrapping up research for my own book, Hunting Grounds, Dogman of the Lake, there seems to be a preponderance of Dogman activity in areas where there is a history of iron or coal mining. And you can point to that in Ohio. You can point to it in the land between the lakes. You can point to it in a couple of areas as well. But there does seem to be some overlap in proximity of these mines to Dogman activity. And I don't know why that is, but what do you think, Kenny?
That's some straight up great knowledge right there. And I'm a geeker and nerd, so I love to sit back and just learn right there and stuff it all in the file cabinet of my brain. And there's a huge difference with a lot of the entities, like the Skinwalker, Dogman, and then also quote unquote werewolves. And Heather actually tapped on it too, because that's how the North American Dogman Project, how we break it down is you have reports that claim it could be paranormal based, then you have extraterrestrial and physically ones as well. So as Aaron was just stating about some taking shots and not receiving wounds and being found by miners. Well, some really interesting and scary stuff that our cult team and some of our biblical historians, because I'm really spiritual, but I'm not religious, so I wasn't really introduced to a lot of this stuff until the biblical historians. And like I said, some of our team that specialize in the occult brought it up to me. And I've touched on it a few times. There's a bunch of books that are quote unquote cursed and supposedly unable to be deciphered. And people that are able to decipher them have bad luck. And the Vatican's got them all locked up. And moral of all that is, and anyone that wants to hear about all that, there will be an episode out soon where I cover that for the whole entire time. But what happens inside of that is the manifestations, supposedly, because I've always been on the borderline of just Dogman in general, because I'm a journalist. I've never seen any of these things. But now, fast forward about, I don't know, a year and a half doing my own research, chilling with Jody, seeing you stuff y'all put out, and just other great researchers like Jessica and things. Now, instead of being 70-30, I would say I'm probably 55-45 believing that the Dogman is a thing now. Okay. And with werewolves and such, same thing. I was like, you know what? I'm not really going to subscribe to this, because when you see Skinwalkers things and the Native American lore and legends, for the most part, that culture of individuals had a great head on their shoulders. They treated the land well. They knew exactly what was occurring. They only took what they needed. I mean, yeah, you had some rogue tribes, but for the most part, they were a pretty chilled out culture of people. So they, in my opinion, knew what the heck they were seeing in the forest. Okay. I mean, if they saw what to them was something like a dogman wearing a skull or something manifesting, I mean, they have to know the difference between that and a regular mountain lion or bear. So, but then when you look at like the medieval times, this is just my opinion, I feel like culture kind of regressed after like the Greeks and Romans fell. The medieval times, we all just went bananas. It seemed like we just thought everybody was witches, vampires, and we just lost control of reality. Like, I mean, okay, your whole village gets sick. Okay, yes, well, no one's taking care of themselves. No one's bathing. Everyone's eating undercooked food. You're going to the bathroom, not washing your hands. Okay, yes. So, yeah, your whole village is sick. Okay. Oh, it's got to be a vampire. Oh, yeah, it has to be a vampire. She just recently is deceased and now so and so sick. So they dig up this vampire, so they say, and the body's bloating. Well, yes, this is what happens with bodies and such. And then they, put a stake in it and a brick, and okay. Well, realistically, yeah, let's think. Let's start with the hygiene a little bit. You know what I mean? And same thing with like the bump in the night and the strange noises. Just the medieval, no matter what, if you put on an herb, oh, they're a witch. Hang 'em. It's just like they lost like touch on reality for a bit. So I never really totally subscribed to the werewolf thing, because, of course, when you're torturing people and doing all this crazy things, yeah, people are going to say whatever. And yeah, you people were off your rocker for the most part, unfortunately. So
Hmm.
then I was introduced, though, to the occult books, kind of, not myself, just from the people that showed them to me. And then you start to see, the manifestations now of not just like the medieval times, but the Nordic culture, speaking of this, the Muslim cultures, and the Navajo legends. Yeah, they're different, but they all kind of stem from the same pot of doing really screwed up stuff. And when it comes to a ton of like the werewolf sightings and some of the things that are supposedly manifested, they smell like sulfur. Same thing with like hellhounds and some of the more demonic Sasquatch sightings. And that seems to tie in with the manifestation aspects, which is really interesting as well. And when you look at like the land between the lakes, right? With the
Hmm.
indigenous cultures and what happened there and being pushed out, and then coming in and setting up basically a tourist attraction. Well, that land was cursed from the indigenous cultures that were ticked off with the disrespect and the flooding of the grave sites. Well, that obviously is terrible stuff. To top it off, well, then you look at like the eastern witches in Kentucky again that were basically forced up into the mountains and cursed the land as well. Really got me thinking that, say if the massacre did occur down there, what if it really wasn't a dogman? What if it was a manifestation, like an actual werewolf, from all the dang curses and the graveyards in there? And maybe when people are seeing them in graveyards, that it could be coincidentally a dogman, but in actuality it might be a werewolf being manifested through the occult activities.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, there's definitely. I want to be careful how I say this because I'm not. I don't have any hard opinions as to yes, it's this or yes, it's that. Like you, I mean, I try to stay open minded, but that I do think there's something to that idea, and it's an idea that Heather and I both kind of heard from different witnesses and from different researchers, is of the idea that like these areas that are so charged with bad juju, to put it very very lightly and in very stupid terms, where all these terrible things have happened, where there's been a history of slavery, of warfare, of displacement, of the land being abused and ravaged. You start to question, like, well, is it this place for a reason? Does it have anything to do with all of the things that have happened? Like the bitterness has soaked into the ground. That's what I said. There it is.
Yeah.
So I do find myself asking that question a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about areas with the big thing is displacement. People were forced out, like you mentioned, the Native American tribes were forced out. But then also, when the white settlers came in, eventually they were forced out too when it comes to land between the lakes. So, like, no one was able to actually stay in that area for very long. And the idea of, I think it's interesting you're talking about the idea of something manifesting in the graveyards that might be, um, to me, it reminds me of almost the hauntings that are more impression hauntings, residual hauntings that just come up after the fact because energy was imprinted in the place. So in that aspect, it just reminds me more of an actual paranormal scenario instead of a flesh and blood scenario. But then when you're talking about a massacre occurring, obviously, if that happened, we're in flesh and blood territory squarely at that point because people lost their lives.
Mhm.
To what though? I don't know.
That is straight up really great stuff right there. And that's why I like to present that. And I had been saving up that question for a little bit, especially for both of y'all. And
Thanks. That was a fun one.
right. Well, to add a little bit more to it, though, is like you were saying with some of, a Skinwalker Ranch, where again, I don't know the most about that, but apparently somebody's seeing, I believe one time, quote unquote, dogman smoking a cigarette in a trench coat. Somebody else, like you said, I guess, saw it get literally a large piece of its rib blown off, no reaction. Well,
Mhm.
like Heather was just saying, if something's a manifestation of energy, then it's not going to have a reaction. And if you've ever had a chance to really dive into the Nahani Valley, it's super creepy because hyenas and such like crush the head of their prey. And up
Mhm.
there, everyone loses their head. And there's a ton of cave systems, and the indigenous cultures up there speak of this animal that I can't even really say its name too well, the Shakaware or
Oh
Shakuware.
yes, I am familiar with this one. It took me a minute, but yeah, I have heard this one.
Yes,
Sorry.
and they look like hyenas, okay, like huge, massive hyenas. But these indigenous cultures say they would shoot arrows at it or even muskets, okay? And it wouldn't do damage to it, but it was leaving tracks, which at first I wasn't sure if something that was paranormal based could leave tracks, but according to people that specialize in that, they can. And by doing certain things like salt and stuff, you can see them. But either way, I guess they can. But that would explain why when they were taking a shot at this thing, there would be no sort of damage to it. So obviously, I guess, just like you and I, an animal would have a spirit, which I do believe 100% they do because I have wild animals I've befriended and pets that I love. Everything has a soul. Okay, so if something, has a life expectancy in the wild of, let's say 20, 30 years, and it's just had cubs or babies or something and dramatically leaves this world. Well, if in theory, which again, I don't know the most about the paranormal, but that seems to be kind of the theme of what happens with ghosts, people that, maybe didn't get it to say, hey, goodbye to a loved one or have uncompleted things. So they're kind of stuck in limbo. Well, same thing. I mean, why would this animal's energy not manifest as well and be stuck in limbo where, like Heather was saying, you wouldn't necessarily be seeing something that could fully be occurring right then, but it's residual, meaning because it spent so much time there, its energy's just there. But then they have the other aspect where this thing came and took their dogs. Okay, literally, it was taking and eating their dogs at night, and that's why they
Yeah.
started trying to hunt it. So there seems to be also maybe the aspect of something being physical too, which then ties into the actual hyenas that could still be roaming. So were they seeing an actual residual haunting of a hyena, but then these things are still there?
I love that idea because I've heard people say before, like, what if Bigfoot is the ghost of some human ancestor? And I'm not saying that's what I think the case is, but maybe I can't prove that it's not. And I love those ideas that like maybe the fabric of time is not as tight as we think it is. Like we're barely at a place as a species where we're starting to understand things like quantum physics. There's so much more we haven't discovered. So like is that a possibility? Is there some overlap between timelines and we just see these things where they used to live for one reason or another? I love that idea. I think that's such a cool concept.
This also had me going down the path of a trickster, right? So the
Mm,
idea of a trickster element, which comes up in a lot of things, actually, not just paranormal or cryptid, they kind of overlap a little bit. But if we have something that's like a trickster that can manifest in one way or pretend to be something, I've heard people say that about like Bigfoot. Is it actually a flesh and blood creature that's out in the woods, or is it a trickster that's manifesting itself to be like this creature that's in the woods? So I'm wondering if that could be, I mean, why would a trickster be just like chained to one particular type of entity? It could be whatever it wanted to be as far as that goes. Um, so I'm wondering if trickster elements don't play into the fold as well.
mm, mm.
Great stuff right there. And I do believe that they do, meaning, again, I look into the dogman aspect, but I've had a really interesting couple cases presented to me that we'll touch on real quick before I have another bizarre set of questions to ask y'all. Well, there was a case where two military people were in Germany and they were just running, border control. So actually, in this point in time, you have two people here, and they claim that they heard strange talking, and they're like, what? So they stopped talking because they thought maybe it was them, and no. So when they turn around, they see what looks to be this shaggy, decrepit looking like wolf creature. And they're sitting there looking at this thing. So they start to back up and turn around, back up, and it's gone now. So they're like, what the heck? but then they start running, and when they turn around and look back in the same spot, now is a really old looking shaman man that was super
Oh.
decrepit looking with glowing eyes. Okay, so
Ooh.
right there, like Heather was saying, the trickster. And then you have another
Mhm.
case down in Arizona where these two officers did not want to go on this highway because it has had a ton of reports like this because it's near a bunch of reservations and interesting stuff. So these people were claiming to see either a strange wolf or a old man on the side of the road. These were the calls. So these two officers were
Mhm.
like, "Oh crap, we gotta go check this out. I don't want to do this," but they had no choice. So they're driving pretty slow down the road. I think they said like 10, 15 miles per hour. They have their light on. They're just talking to each other, shining it all around. They're not seeing anything, so they still have the spotlight on and talking. All of a sudden, the guy in the passenger seat is not talking anymore. So he's like, "What the heck?" He looks over at the driver, and the driver just looks straight up like he's looking at something as he's supposed to be driving. And the guy's like, "You're supposed to be driving." He turns over and looks, and they see what looks to be this creepy, shaggy looking, decrepit looking wolf creature. So they speed off, and they claim that it kind of, kept pace for a little bit, but then boom, did not keep up with them anymore. And then it was an old, decrepit looking indigenous man with glowing eyes. Okay. And then the final case is back when there was a huge amount of forest fires in Northern California. You had military members, also reserves that were coming in and just trying to help out the firefighters, set up areas where they could, realize, hey, this has been cleared, etc. Well, you had one group of Marines that were going to meet up with another, and they pulled up in their Humvees, and they had to set up a generator and a light for the next, group of firefighters. So they're setting it up, just sitting there talking. All of a sudden, they hear the voice of their squadron leader, who's literally standing there talking to them, but this voice is coming from the forest. So they're like, "What the heck?" So they all turn around, turn their flashlights on, and again, you have multiple people here, just like the other cases. So, mostly it's usually one person. No, so they shine the light, and they see what looks to be this decrepit looking, mangy looking wolf thing with glowing eyes trying to speak to them. They all got in the Humvees and left. Heather had just mentioned with the trickster aspect, it makes me wonder, are they just allowing you to see what it is they want to see? Is it really just that old decrepit man and he's wanting you to see that wolf because, we're talking about distortion now, and obviously if you're doing the stuff to become a skinwalker, well, it's obviously dark magical aspects, so why would you not have that type of control? And it's just an interesting aspect.
Yeah, that just reminds me of American Werewolves 2 that we did, and there's a story in there actually very similar where the woman, because we're talking around the area of Navajo Nation, and the woman was talking about they were out at a party, and this light shows up in the distance, and they see it walking closer to them, and pretty soon it's this older woman holding a lantern, and she asks for a ride back to her home, and so they give her a ride back to her where she says her home is, and she actually just asked them to drop her off in the middle of this field. And
Mm.
upon her getting out of the car, there is like a shape shifting element. They never see them in the same thing. They see the the large wolf that appears like in front of the vehicle, and then they go to back up, but then in like the rear view mirror they see the old woman or something like that. It's something along those lines, but they never see the wolf and the woman at the same time. Um, and so they absolutely, at the end of it, they were talking to each other like, I think we just had an encounter with the skinwalker. Um, I don't know, just had to throw that in there that it sounded just like other stories. Aaron.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I had the same thought, but like we kind of get into that same territory in American Werewolves too. There were stories even out of Texas. I'm thinking of, it's colloquially referred to as the Gregton werewolf, but it was one originally
Mhm.
documented in Fate magazine in the 1950s. And Heather was able to secure permissions for us to actually reprint the original story in the Texas Dogman Triangle book, which is pretty cool. But that was kind of a similar thing where this woman is alone in her house at night. Her husband is away on business, and she sees this, wolf-like face staring in through her window. and she, freaks out, grabs a flashlight, goes to the window, looks outside, and she sees what looks like, a man with a shaggy head running away. So kind of like almost as if it was halfway between transforming, maybe, or maybe all the way. Of course, we don't know how that works or if it even happens at all. But there is kind of a recurrence if you start looking at Dogman encounters or potential Dogman encounters. Let's be all proper about it. Around the map, you do start to run into more than one where someone will report what appears to be like you looked 1 second and then it was something else, or it seemed to visibly change shape in front of them. Like it's not, you hear that and you're like, that's wild. That's insane. This person is deluded or making things up. And then it's like, well, then why are there 36 reports like this from people who have never met or heard of each other? Huh. And I don't know the answer to that
Exactly.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when it becomes really compelling, is whenever you can find these patterns across various geographical areas amongst people, like you said, that and time even, because the Gregton werewolf was, when was that? Like the 50s or something, or 70s?
54, 57, something like that.
Right.
Yeah, because it was,
So,
you and I had to do a lot of legwork to even track it down and confirm that that story even existed, because it was,
right,
me-
right.
yeah, like it was mentioned a couple times online, but nobody had a full reproduction of it. Not all of the fake back catalog is available digitally, and obviously they're not reprinting the March 1954 edition today. So, yeah.
Right.
Like I went on eBay and found the magazine, and Heather, I don't even know how, was able to get a hold of the people at Fake to let us use it. So it's like, there are a lot of these stories that are just buried places that people don't know about, and they still have all these things in common.
Hmm.
Terrifying stuff for sure, right? And
Hmm.
also, like you said, with the encounters or stories, just think how many just were lost to the wind as well. So, I mean, with the digging and such that y'all are doing and other researchers and such, well, there has to be for every five we find, 15 that are probably never going to be able to be documented, meaning
Oh, for
they
sure.
occurred in small groups of people that are deceased now and their ancestors never knew about it, etc.
I This just reminds me, just because of the research that we've been doing lately. Aaron was talking about how Fate magazine, well, it's been around for a very long time, and the back catalog, unless you find the copies of it, you're not able to access that stuff online anymore, because we are in a digital age. And so, obviously, primarily when we're researching, we're focusing on the things that we can find online. But even the stories, I mean, you have to exclude the stories that people are never going to tell, right? So for every one story you hear, there's what, 10 stories or so that you're never going to hear because people aren't going to share them. But then now also, I'm noticing there were ways that people circulated their information, not just through magazines, but through like newsletters, regional newsletters, things like this, that unless someone, a researcher from back then, took the time to keep all of those in their library, those are just lost. There's countless UFO newsletters, encrypted newsletters, especially Bigfoot newsletters, and different types of circulation that they would just hand mail to one another, on a mailing list, and they're gone now. Unless somebody still has, unless you know somebody who kept them over the years, but they're just lost,
Yeah.
and all of those stories are lost as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we will obviously will never know the scope of what we've already lost, but in a way that makes it more fascinating. If we're able to find this many patterns and this many common threads between all these stories, while presuming that we're missing an enormous percentage of the data pool, I don't know, man. For me, that's almost more compelling than if we had 500 stories that were all the same. It's like these people couldn't have copied each other or piggybacked off each other's narratives, because one of them was, born in the 50s in Texas, and another one was from the land between the lakes in, the freaking 1800s. So it's just, the way we
Yes.
think about these stories and these narratives being polluted as far as the data goes nowadays because of the internet, because of the availability of information, that wasn't possible back then. So, yeah.
Exactly.
100% right there. Well spoken. And think now, even with like pictographs, because hey, there was a point in time where people weren't necessarily able to verbally, pass things along, so they're drawing pictographs, and
Mhm.
all from Utah down into Brazil. Our geologist, William White, pointed it out because he actually went and researched all this because, he's a huge rock nerd, obviously, geology, correct, right? So he
Yeah.
loves that. And all from basically north to south is pictographs of what looks to be like skinwalkers and people transforming into wolf like creatures and such. So, again, think right there. I mean, those people are more or less trying to tell their encounter to an extent, but yet think how many must not have been, written on a rock as well.
Yeah, and you said something earlier, Kenny, that I really liked, and that's that, these native tribes and these native cultures, they had good heads on their shoulders. They weren't stupid. They weren't the
Hmm.
primitive people that later settlers tried to portray them as. So, you'll have uh, researchers who, and I'm speaking in very, very general terms, okay, not calling anybody out, but you'll have researchers who will say, like, all I part of the reason that I think there's validity to Sasquatch is because the Native Americans talked about things that we think of as being Sasquatch. But I don't believe in Dogman. I don't believe in werewolves. Well, there are native tribes that also talked about what we think of as being like Dogmen or werewolves. And I don't know any researcher that values, culture and folklore and being true to historical record that's going to say, well, the Native Americans were wrong about this. Like that's just dumb. So, really like that you made that point that like these people didn't tell these stories and pass them down for no reason, and maybe it's a literal example of something they saw and interacted with. Maybe it's allegorical and it's about human nature and man meeting nature and becoming something in between. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to parse that out, but again, I really like that you made that point. I think that's important.
Well, one thing we can infer is that it was important enough to be shared through generation to generation to make it to where we know about it now, right?
Mm.
So they needed to share stories, and I'm thinking back to even Greek and Roman times before we had full understanding, not that we have full understanding now, but had the understanding that we have now of the science and stuff. They had stories, they had what we would call myths to explain things that were going on, but it was important for them to share these stories because they were more in tune with the land. They had to live off the land a lot more. It was a lot more relevant to them than it would be to us. They were more susceptible to the elements. These stories were a lifeline for them. And I have no doubt that it's something similar for the native tribes. Why would it not be? But like I said, they shared it enough times that it is still in our society. We're still talking about it. And that in itself means that it was important because you're not going to take time to memorize stories and share them unless there's something worth their salt.
Mm.
Beautifully spoken as well, and preach right there. Because again, yes, before I ask you this last set of questions, we're not talking about being able to sit in our house now and just create art like you stated. I mean, this is points in time where whoever was doing that was not contributing to hunting for the day or gathering food or anything else. I mean, they're sitting there painting. So was art that important back then? I don't know. I didn't live then. But if they, as you were stating, were taking that time to draw that, there has to be some sort of validity to this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, it had to
And
have some sort of importance.
yes, 100%. So this final thing, which I think is pretty creepy but cool, which I have to be careful with using that because to whoever experiences it, it's not cool, but to be a journalist to cover it, it's super cool. When you look at the cynocephali being able to make their own armor and wear clothing and wear furs, well, you also have cases of people reporting seeing Sasquatch wear moccasins and also furs and things, which are interesting. But there's also cases now of people seeing them wearing skulls. Okay, like a caribou skull or a deer skull. And if the cynocephali could create armor and fight with Heratus, I assume a skull wouldn't really cause a protection that much, but could it solidify some sort of stature. And the reason I say that is there's also reports of people seeing dogmen basically with like mud or stuff where it looks to be like maybe a plant or something that is rubbed on its like muzzle that almost like war paint or something.
That's interesting. And I'll be straight up. I haven't personally received any reports that involve that. Um, I've heard cases where they seem to behave with like human like intelligence. They seem to perceive like they seem to know what firearms are, recognize that as a threat. I could point to a few cases where that seems to be the case, but that's as far as I can think of, like, as far as like data I've reviewed where there seems to be an understanding on the part of these creatures as to the abstraction of like weapons or armor. The only one that comes to mind specifically is the Defiance werewolf, which was 1970s. Defiance, Ohio. This creature showed up and apparently hit a guy with a 2x4. Yeah,
Sorry, that it always gets me that he just picked up a
I
two by
love
four.
that one.
Bam!
It just
Yeah.
whacks him, just hits him for no apparent reason. Literally, that's the only case I've done detailed research on where I can think of, that being reported. And I'm not saying that it's not. That's just, my answer is predicated on that. That's my level of knowledge there. But what that seems to demonstrate would be, again, like an understanding of the abstraction of what a weapon is or of what armor is. Or maybe it's not something that's practical for use. Maybe it's more of a status thing, like understand that this is something that elevates this individual above the status of others. And I'm trying to think of it in human terms, like what that could represent. But short answer, dude, is I don't know. Then that takes me back to like, well, are they animals? Are they supernatural beings? Is it something in between? Like, is it the supernatural realm emulating a mundane animal? Like, it takes me in way too many circles, man. Yeah, it's such an
Mhm.
interesting question.
Yeah, because it absolutely harkens back to the way that humans act in general, right? So if we have thinking about a scenario where in battle someone is wearing a skull or something like that, not only could it be status, 'cause clearly it's not the best armor, it could be status, it could be just simply to intimidate the opponent. Um, so I think that's about the only way that we could look at and hypothesize. I mean, we can only go off of what we know so far. And so it seems like if they're doing that, that's more of a humanistic type trait. So then what are we looking at right now? If people are seeing things like that, then what is that? And now we're out of the realm of this is just an animal. I would think that unless it's a trickster thing again, I think we're out of the realm of paranormal, that it's more like a human, but what in the world? Like that doesn't fit like our worldview right now. It is.
Yeah.
It puts you in circles for sure.
Again, so well spoken. And before I let you both go, it really ties into, like I was stating, about how there is the similarities of when people use the term dogman, but there's the differences. 'Cause, I mean, we are having, like we said, the paranormal type stuff, but I think when something is understanding, like per se the weapon, and it knows it can take damage, that really ties me back into the cynocephaly. Okay. And I take a little bit more credence too in historical references than I do, say, modern times, like 3 weeks ago, because we all know hoaxing so prevalent now, and what you can
Yeah.
gain from hoaxing, etc. But Alexander the Great, come on, let's be real. This dude has no time to sit around and crack jokes and things. This guy was trying to be a god and just conquer and kick ass, more or less. And for him to take the time and have Herodotus now and Ctesias document these things that literally they were fighting with on their side and against these beings sometimes, and that they also lived deep in the mountains and would come down and trade with them, that they couldn't speak their language, but they would yip and understand, and they would also use basically sign language to understand what was going on. They would make their own armor. They would create their own weapons. And according to Alexander the Great, they were hellacious beasts, and he much preferred to be with them than against them, yet they could still be unalived, that just like anyone else. Yes, it would take some effort, but they did not, according to him, go out of their way to consume people, but they would take the bodies of the deceased off of the battlefields and eat them. Okay, so in my opinion, this is the Dogman reference, and this is what I think the Dogman is. I believe the Cynocephali had obviously enough intelligence to create their weapons and battle and win sometimes and trade. So they must very well be aware of what could cause them damage. And I mean, you have an older report of a farmer. I don't know if he had a spear or just a sharp stick, and he was being attacked by one of these dogmen, and he impaled it with its own weight, and he actually unalived it. Okay, and you have other cases where people take shots at it, and it screams, blood flies everywhere. Okay, it's taking damage. It's not liking that. And just like with a grizzly bear, right? There's cases of people unloading on that and it doesn't unalive it. And then there's other times where someone just hits it with a low caliber weapon right in a certain spot and they drop. Okay, so that would solidify that it has to be in physical realm because Alexander the Great tells you he can unalive these things with steel, with a sword. Okay, so that doesn't seem to me that there's any sort of mystical aspect to it because it's being unalive just like his soldiers are. But then you have, the manifestations of the Skinwalkers now and the Nordic tribes speaking about all that, which brings difference. But I think some people still just, I'm so guilty of it too because everyone else does, which you're not supposed to follow the leader, but people interject the terms of werewolves and dogmen, and werewolf sounds cooler. I mean, like that picture I showed you where if we're playing by the rules, it should have been Dogman Square, right? But what did I say? Werewolf Square, because it sounds cooler. But yes, there's a huge difference. And that's where, you have some of the massive differences: werewolves, occult manifestations, dogmen, physical cynocephaly. Like Heather said, could they have been extraterrestrial based? Not even saying from outer space coming down from inside the caves, because they did live in cave systems all across, not Native American culture, but over in India and also in Greece and the mountains and such. So it just brings a really interesting aspect.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of layers to it. That's, again, for me, like that's what makes this topic so confounding. You can go in so many different directions and still learn something. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that even, I mean, Aaron's written 2 books on it, and we're still uncovering things.
Yeah.
And not that 2 books would ever be enough to cover any subject in particular, but I mean, it's a good head start. And yeah, there's still new stuff coming up to us all the time. And I don't know as if it has done anything other than make us come up with more questions as we
Yes.
go through things. So it's just it's a mystery.
100%. And well, thank you so much for both taking time out of your busy schedule to come hang out with us. And the bottom line is, though, honestly, even though we create more questions, we definitely are getting some more answers as well. So I encourage both of you and everyone else over at Small Town Monsters to keep grinding away and get that information out there. And also, I encourage my audience, yes, please go check their stuff out. I will get both of them back on here soon. I don't know if they'll be together, but I will have Heather and Aaron on again sooner than later. So thank you very much.
Hey,
Thank
thank
you.
you, man.
Thank you for everyone who once again stopped by tonight for this episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on Star Fox Radio. If you do enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, and share it. Feed the algorithm, and I will see you very soon.